The second thing to note here is that suppose you followed the objector's advice. Suppose you said, okay, look, you're right. I believe Christianity and there's all these alternatives to it that other people accept, so I shouldn't believe Christianity. What do you do then? Well, you give Christianity up. But now what's the problem? Well, now you're holding a position that large numbers of people reject, Christians. So presumably then you should give up your sceptical position. But now you're adopting a position which large numbers of people reject, skeptics. So presumably you should adopt a skeptical position. But now you're holding a position which large numbers of people reject. So, you know, this objection just goes round and round and round in circles. You need to bear in mind that the kind of pluralist mindset that goes on here, the idea that is pervasive in our culture, you know, that all beliefs are equal and that all equally true and this sort of thing, is a very peculiar 20th century Western mindset. Most religions throughout history have rejected that view. So that the kind of pluralist mindset actually is, what amazes me is how often people accept it, because when you think about it, it's actually a fundamentally contradictory position. Pluralists, by saying all religions are equal, are essentially saying that large numbers of religions who reject that claim are false. But then if they're false, they're not equally true. See, so the whole pluralist mindset is actually full of contradictions. It sounds nice and tolerant and embracing, but ultimately, when you examine it at root, really it's based on the idea that everyone who's not a pluralist is wrong. Right? Which is precisely the view they're saying you shouldn't adopt. Okay? So it's a really incoherent position. I find it always bizarre when I was in religious studies departments that people would always push this line, honestly. You do quite a lot of fun with the lecturers actually. Okay. So that's the first two objections I've looked at, the idea that you need proof to be rational, and the idea that it's arbitrary to believe that one particular reason is true. Now I want to look at the last one that I want to look at tonight, and that is the idea that doesn't evil prove the non-existence of God, or doesn't evil prove that Christianity is false? Now this is a really ancient objection, and it's a really common one. It's usually posed where somebody puts forward a question. Somebody says, why does God allow evil? And the idea is that there's lots of suffering and evil in the world. There's lots of terrible things that we've seen happen in our century and previous centuries. And the question goes out, why does God allow evil? What you need to realise when someone asks a question like that is that often it's a rhetorical question. It disguises an argument or an objection. It's important to remember that. There is a difference between a question and an objection. When we talk about apologetics, you're interested in the objection. And there's I think a Daniel Howard Snyder who gives this, he makes this point really clearly. He says, the theoretical problem of evil is often expressed in the form of a pointed question. God is able to prevent evil and suffering, and he would know about them before they happen, right? Moreover, since he is unsurpassably good, surely he would not permit them just for fun. So why does he allow evil? Now, the argument alluded to here really can be summarised again into two basic claims. The first is the claim that God, because he is omniscient and omnipotent, that is, he's all-knowing and all-powerful, a being like that would be able to both know all the suffering that exists and have the ability to prevent it. Right? The second claim is that because God is good, God would not allow such evil to exist unless he had good reason. And Snyder talks about a good reason as what he calls a justifying reason, a reason that is compatible with good and loving, etc. Right? Now, if you put these two principles together, it entails that if God exists, he must have a reason for allowing suffering. Right? You see that? Those two claims put together entail that if God actually exists, he must have a reason for allowing evil. And that's when the question is really thrown. Why does God allow suffering? And the Christian is confronted with questions. What are God's reasons for allowing this? Some of you will remember that tragedy in Tongariro National Park, not long ago, where several people at Ewan School drowned. And this question was thrown in the media, wasn't it? Why did God allow this? Why did God allow this? Now, the rhetorical force of this argument is powerful, and there's often a lot of emotion tied up with it. But if you're going to look at the question purely rationally, there's actually an important flaw in this. And it's not just me who said this, by the way. Numerous philosophers, both atheist and Christian, have pointed this out. I've got a list here, but I won't go into it. There's quite a number of people who have pointed out the objection I'm about to show. The flaw in this argument is that the two assumptions that I just showed you, they establish that if God exists, he must have a reason for allowing evil. The question, however, doesn't actually challenge this. It just asks us to tell him what it is. Okay? The question, does God allow evil, asks me to tell people what is God's reason. But the argument that I just put up has the conclusion that God has a reason. The inference that's subtly going on here is the idea is that if a Christian can't give an account of why God allows a reason, then he has none. Do you see that? Okay? The argument shows God must have a reason. The objector doesn't actually contest that. He just asks you what it is. The assumption is that if you can't answer what it is, then there is none. Right? Got that point? It's important to grasp that. And this is the assumption upon which the argument hangs or falls. If the failure of a Christian to provide God's reasons in detail to some crisis does not provide grounds for thinking that there is no reason, then the argument collapses. Okay. Now, what's interesting is the assumption behind this argument is actually questionable. Alvin Plantinga, again, provides quite a vivid example of the problem. This is what Plantinga says. He says, I look inside my tent. I don't see a Saint Bernard. Then it's probable that there is no Saint Bernard in my tent. That is because if there were one, I would very likely have seen it. It is not easy for a Saint Bernard to avoid detection in a small tent. You can see something like Plantinga's dry humour in this quote. Again, I look inside my tent. I don't see any no-seeers, very small midges with a bite out of all proportions of its size. This time it's not particularly probable that there are no no-seeers in my tent, at least not any more probable than before I looked. The reason, of course, is that even if there were no-seeers there, I wouldn't see them. They too wouldn't see them. Right? Plantinga goes on to note, the assumption behind the argument from evil is that God's reasons for allowing evil are like a Saint Bernard and not a no-seer. Right? As Timothy Keller notes, we see lurking within this hard-nosed scepticism and enormous faith in one's mental abilities. If we, human beings, plumb the depths of the universe for answers to suffering, can't find any, we assume that there is nothing God knows about. We assume there are none. And Keller goes on to say, it seems to be a pretty blind faith at all. So I suggest to you that in order for this actual question or this argument to pose a threat to the Christian, it seems then what's needed is some argument as to show why God's reasons are more like Saint Bernard than a no-seer, to use Plantinga's terms. And these would have to be arguments on premises which Christians are somehow rationally required to accept. If they showed you an argument from the premises you weren't required to accept, you could just reject the premise. I'm inclined to think that this, I've read a bit of the literature here, and we haven't really been terribly many plausible arguments for this claim. In fact, I'm inclined to think it's false. It seems to suggest that a finite human being with limited factual knowledge, a limited perspective in time and space, and an imperfect moral character does not know any reason for a particular event to occur. It follows that an omniscient, perfectly good God, who has no unlimited perspective, has no reason to know. William Alston, who's another good Christian philosopher, has said that the skeptic's argument here is a bit like a person who, with very little background in quantum physics, decided that because he couldn't understand the writings of the world's greatest physicist, he didn't know what he was talking about. He couldn't understand why the physicist held a particular position. He says, well, obviously he doesn't have a good reason for it, so I don't understand it. And Alston says, well, that wouldn't show anything, because the person knows that he does not have the same knowledge, level, and information as the physicist. So that's, I think, one of the real problems with this argument, but I'll briefly make two others. Okay? So I just suggested that the argument itself doesn't work, but let's just for the sake of argument assume them wrong. Let's just suppose that the failure of a theist or a believer in God or a Christian to provide an answer does mean that it's improbable that there is one. And hence the fact of suffering and evil does make the existence of God improbable. What follows from this?